Okay, hello. We are here together today because I want to try to convince Jake to sell part of his Pokemon collection. We've been talking about this back and forth a little bit. It's definitely come up in some of our videos and interviews. But I guess what it comes down to, from my point of view, and why I honestly want to give my most honest advice to Jake is there's so much uncertainty, and now is clearly a good time to be selling. It could also be a good time to be buying. We just don't know. But we do know that like a huge amount of your collection has increased, an insane amount in value, which I know you'll talk about in a future video. And if I were you and I had a collection that was as valuable as yours, I would think personally about hedging it, right? And just thinking like, here's some amount that I want to keep for myself, no matter what. Even if the value went to zero, I'd be happy with it because I love these cards. But
Yeah.
here's some amount that I'm able to part with. It's like duplicates or sets I care less about, or sets that are just particularly valuable right now, and be like, might as well just hedge my assets between Pokemon and cash. And if Pokemon ever goes down, I'll just use that cash to buy more Pokemon. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that so I've sold a little bit, but I've sold very, very little. And I think like my, to give our audience sort of like my thinking and my perspective on what's happening right now. And I think it's become fairly clear some of my feelings and opinions on what might be driving the market and some of my concerns. But I also think that it is possible that this is being driven by that huge wave of, mid 30-year-olds, early 30s, mid 20-year-olds who, came into this, right, probably because they're bored and maybe because they're not feeling so good because of COVID, or they need something to do, they need a way to make money and be engaged, but that it's possible that is going to lead to long-term genuine interest in collectors. And so a lot of these people who are, even the people who might be flipping cards right now, because I think there are tons of people who are flipping cards right now and are trying to make short-term profit, but even they may not leave the market, right? The fear is they're going to come in for the hype and then they're going to move on with their life and move into something else. And the prices are going to come back down. More people aren't going to replace them. The fear is that, as I talked about, people like Gary Vee talking about Pokemon, with his tons and tons of followers, maybe bringing some people over from sports, people looking for that nostalgia, looking for that joy. And so those are the concerns. I think for me personally, it's like, I don't know which way it's going to go. I am not buying anything. I'll just be totally candid with everyone. I bought some like Worlds promo stamped cards because I thought that they were still undervalued and could have room to grow. And I will buy cards like that if they come up on the market. But I am literally buying nothing right now. And I am building cash. I'm building, I basically take a certain amount of money and I put it aside for Pokemon is how I do it. I budget myself. And it's that usually before that I was spending literally everything every single month because I felt, and you can confirm this, I'm not just saying this for the audience because I've been telling you this for years. I felt like I'm getting these unbelievable deals. I'm paying, $50, $60 for these PSA 10s that are very few in the world. And I just see like huge exponential growth potential. What scares me so much is how much that growth has been. And like the fact that we've seen like 800%, and I want to repeat 800% return on investment on average in like Wizards of the Coast Gym Challenge. I bought a card, a Misty's Golduck, where there were like 2 or 3 of them sitting for months on eBay a year and a half ago. They were sitting there for $250. Now I just heard someone paid $6,000 for that card. The exact same card that there were 3 sitting on eBay for a while at $250. So I just want people like those numbers to sink in. That should scare you. That should say that your I would argue your correct response to that should be like, oh my God, like I could have gotten it for that little, that short a time ago. Like, am I so sure that the market has changed so fundamentally that I'm willing to spend that much? And so, so I definitely am on the side of like, that's just how I feel. Right. And people have different opinions, and I'm not going to tell you guys what to do. And I could be biased, right? Because I was used to those lower prices and I felt like those prices made sense for Pokemon. And now all the new people are seeing only these new prices, and that makes sense to them. And they feel like that the value's there, and that is going to be sort of our new baseline going forward. That would be awesome. That's what I hope happens. I hope people don't get the wrong impression. I would like the market to keep going up.
Yeah, and that
You know?
I totally buy it, but I guess my question
Yeah.
is, if you feel that way,
Yeah.
that same sort of uncertainty that I do, tied to all the other things
Yeah.
I've mentioned, with around like macroeconomic concerns, and debt bubbles and all that, like, why would you not just start selling? And obviously being smart
Yeah.
about it, right? Not just like selling it all in one big lot or like auctions on the same day, but just piece by piece every week sell like 5 more valuable cards until you sort of like get out of your duplicates and just like get into cash.
So the reasons I'm not selling is I am concerned that if I sell these really hard to find cards, I may not get them again. I do have genuine concern. And so this fear of missing out piece that people have, I think is genuine because we don't know how much more supply there's going to be, and we don't know how much people are going to demand for those prices. So although I think paying $6,000 for a card that was $250, a few months ago is crazy, there's also a real fear that if I sell that Misty's Goldjug PSA 10, which I want for my collection, there's a real fear I'll never get that card back for lower because there's so few of them. And so even if I think people are doing irrational things, it doesn't matter because at the end of the day, it is what it is, right? These things are cardboard. They can be worth any amount, and I've heard people comment on this on the channel as a response to what I'm saying. And I understand this, right? Like people can pay any amount that they want. They're worth what they're worth. But what we're trying to do on this channel is understand like how stable are these new prices. And I think for these lower pop cards, they could be quite stable because a certain number of those cards are in collections, right? And are probably never going to leave. And people like me who don't need the money, I don't have to sell. So there's that part too, right? And so there are going to be, I bet there are a lot of people out there who feel exactly like me. They think the prices are crazy. They own the cards already. They've owned them for a long time, but they're not selling because they love the cards and they don't want to lose them. So the new people buying the cards who might want to flip them or who might want to keep them in their collections, they're buying it at those new prices. And so so they're definitely not going to want to sell for below those prices. And, now I think it's very different for cards that there are a lot of, and it's very different for modern cards. And that's why I'm very fearful of modern cards. And I don't own, I own the shiny Hidden Fates Charizard, the Japanese in Japanese, and the Japanese one is tied to the English, in terms of value, so they really are tied. And I own that Burning Shadows, English Charizard, two of the most popular, expensive modern cards. And so I'm not saying this because I'm hating on modern. I like the modern cards, but those can really shift. Like if opinion changes, and I want people to hear this and understand this, if opinion changes in 6 months and or a year, 5 years, or 3 years, and Pokemon becomes really out of fashion, there's a lot more of that supply is going to come on the market for people who didn't pay the really high prices, for people who are now opening them from packs or still opening them from packs and then flipping them and selling them. And so they're going to be new cards coming on the market that aren't in the flippers' hands who paid the really high prices and don't want to sell for less, and aren't in those hardcore collector fans who want to keep it forever. And so you always want to think about, that's why supply is so important on the supply side. Now, people talk a lot about, I've heard comments saying that I talk too much about supply or about population and not enough about demand. At the end, so I want to say this very clearly: it's all about demand. Everything at the end of the day is about demand, but it's about demand in relation to supply. And so, just so we can all be on the same page, those are very like economics 101, right, Raffi? Like we both understand that, and so.
Yeah, Golduck is a less popular Pokemon than Charizard, but given how few of those Misty's Golducks there are, even if few people want them, that dictates the price.
Yeah, and the reality is like I really want that card and I really love that card and like that card. And so I know there are lots of other people out there that feel the same way.
Right, and there's a certain amount of demand that's totally uncorrelated with how popular the Pokemon or even the card is because people want to complete sets.
And the danger of demand is demand can be very volatile. So when we talk about modern has two volatility points: demand and supply. Both the amount of demand is very volatile, and also the supply is very volatile because there can be reprints, and we don't have exact numbers of how many these cards are, right? When you look at base set first edition, which is probably the most fleshed out pop report, because those cards have always had the most value and the most interest, so people were actually grading those. That is probably a more solid a population count on how many PSA 10s, how many PSA 9s there are, right? Now, I wouldn't be shocked at all if those numbers doubled or tripled in 20 years. And that is the lowest one that we have. The other ones like could see huge increases in population over time. So for me, I'm trying to balance all of those things out. And where I wind up is I don't really know what's going on in the market right now. I love these cards. I would be afraid to sell them and not be able to get it back. And so I'm going to sit here until I feel like I understand what's happening better, until I see things calm down. If you needed the money, like if I needed the money, or if the money could really help me in some way and really change the trajectory of my life, I think I'd feel very differently, Raffi. And that's just me personally. And this is not you giving you guys financial advice. This is right. This is talking about like how we feel. And we're just two dudes who like Pokemon and think a lot about this, right?
And I will say, I mean, a counterpoint in potentially different demographic we're not talking about is my demographic, which is people who are, same age as you, but have kids. And things look very different, right? And that's part of the reason my collection is like a fraction the size of yours, because not necessarily because I have less capital to spend, but because I'm much more risk averse. I know how far that money can go in terms of things that I need, like supporting a family or one day like children's education. And so I guess my one counterpoint would be when you talk about this point that it's like things are going to go into people's permanent collections, they're going to keep them forever, they're off the market. How permanent is a real question. And people's financial circumstances do change. And especially this demographic is so subject to being a different demographic in just a few years, right? The single late 20-somethings, early 30-somethings in a few years might be married and have kids. And then their entire mindset and how they think about money changes, and how they think about something collection that brings them value changes, both because the money can be more valuable in their family life, and also because those kinds of things that once seemed valuable to you maybe now pale in comparison to the meaning that you find in having a family. And so I guess where that all leads me is to think that permanent collections, like nothing is permanent, right? And so the question is, how permanent are the permanent collections? Will there be a point, especially if the macroeconomic factors get bad enough, we have another Great Depression, God forbid that happens, but if it does, these things just come back on the market. And of course that drives price lower and lower.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all about percentage. It's all about how many of those collections are there actually, and how much even the economy tanking would affect those people. And nobody knows the answer. Like nobody knows how many of those cards are in sort of very, people who don't have a lot of money's hands. And how many of those cards are in people who have hundreds of millions of dollars even, because I know that there are big whales in Pokemon. And I might have a lot of them, right? They could have like 15 of nobody really knows. Like we think this guy has the biggest collection or that guy has the biggest collection, but like someone who just has never announced what they have could actually have the biggest collection and could have 10.
And what you're referring to
20%,
is literally what causes bubbles to pop, right? So again, not saying it's a bubble, but if that were the case, there's a really good book I think people should read called The Random Walk Down Wall Street, and it talks about investing, but the whole first part of the book is analyzing different bubbles in history. So he talks about like Dutch East India Company securities. He talks about like the tulip fever. These are like really, really old things, but all bubbles have some things in common. One of those things in common is that the asset holders are relatively like low income or low net worth, and so their financial situation is volatile. Like if we were in 2008, 2009, and the people who owned the majority of homes were just like extremely wealthy people who could afford to like lose a lot of money in their homes, we wouldn't have had a financial crisis, right? So I think it's the same thing in Pokemon. If the whales or the people who just like they have enough money to keep these cards no matter what, even if they do have one day have kids, they have enough money. If those people own the majority of the cards we're talking about, I think honestly the market is only going to go up. Right. But if the distribution looks different, especially if it looks like it's all these like new people who are coming in and flipping and even relying on it for income, which is like the lowest of the low in terms of, susceptibility to volatility, then we could be at risk of something like that. And so I guess my question is, what is your hypothesis, right? What is your hypothesis about the distribution of those cards and who owns them right now?
Yeah, I mean, so you're asking me to basically just like throw a pretty wild speculation, which I'm happy to do, but I want to make sure.
Well, where's that speculation coming from, right? You're on the forums,
but I want to make sure. Yeah, but I want to make sure that everyone hears that like this is like my instinct, right? This is my gut, right? My gut is that there's a ton of instability in the market, and I am terrified. And I don't know. Like I'm terrified. Terrified's a strong word because it's Pokemon. But I'm honestly, what I'm terrified for is I'm terrified for like these imagined people I have in my head who may or may not exist, who like have put a lot of money into modern product and really need that money, and that they could like build their future off that money potentially, or like it would change the trajectory of their life or whatever, right? Like I'm terrified. There are lots of people hoarding like modern Pokemon product in particular. It's harder to do that with Wizards of the Coast because they're just so little supply. It's much easier to make a huge mistake, in my opinion, with modern than it is with Wizards of the Coast, just for that reason. There just isn't that, like, how many of those can you buy? Like, there are only like 4 have come up on the market of any specific card in the past 6 months. So you bought all 4, it's not, but people are buying, whereas like right now, there are probably like 4 black label Hidden Fates Charizards being auctioned off right now, and probably someone buy it now or best offer. And it's like, and I saw something going for $10,000. I don't know if you've been following Raffi, but maybe even eclipsing $10,000. And it's just like I really hope the person buying that is a wealthy, very wealthy individual who loves Pokemon. And I love that guy, or the woman who bought that then, right? Like that is cool. Like I'm so happy rich people and people who are wealthy like value things that much. The fear is that the market is built majority new flippers. That's the doomsday scenario. The doomsday scenario is right now the majority of the increase in prices. Very few long-term collectors are actually paying the higher prices. Very few people who are interested in Pokemon in the long term are paying any of the higher prices. And it's vast majority people buying them because they hear from people on YouTube. Everyone is hyping everything up, or not everyone, but so many channels, are, and they hear from these people and they think, someone says, I've made $10,000 in Pokemon. It's like everyone, like, the amount, I'm not going to share how much money I've like made in Pokemon. I haven't made any money, right? I haven't sold my cards, but like theoretically made in Pokemon. That doesn't change. That doesn't give you any more authority. Like the fact that your cards have gone up, like it only matters the quality of your arguments is what matters, not the fact that you have a very valuable collection.
You're saying anyone who bought Pokemon cards a year ago would have made, quote unquote, made money.
Would have made a ton of money. And you have these people, I think, with these overinflated senses of like, I know what I'm talking about. And some of them are definitely just scammers and manipulators and are looking to like become a YouTube person and make money off of YouTube. Like, it's just the reality. Other of them, and I think most of them probably like actually care. They love Pokemon. If they're bored at COVID, just like just like I was, and they feel like they have something to offer and that they understand the market and that they can help people. And so that they probably are coming from that really good place of like, I want to connect to people. I want to share. This is so exciting. We're all making money. This is awesome. And it's just like, and if I own any investment that went up 800%, 8 times in a short period, in a year period, either I, got extremely lucky and I bought at the start of Amazon, and I bought at the start of what is such an amazing product. But like in those situations, it's because people didn't understand what it could be, right? If we compare that to this, it's like, we know what Pokemon is. What we don't know is the demand. And that's going to be the key part. The key part is we all know what these cards are. We all, not all, but we, the majority of us, like hopefully are doing research. We know how many of these cards are. We know they're not very difficult to grade, even Wizards of the Coast or anything compared to like old sports cards. So people thinking your cards will be worth millions of dollars, like it would have to be such high demand in order for the cards to reach that. And I've heard people argue, and I've made arguments about why demand in Pokemon could be more than sports cards ever saw. It is possible because, sports cards, maybe, and I heard, and someone argued this with me and it's a great point and it's something I think about too. But, if you take like NBA basketball, that's an American thing, NBA, football is an American thing, whereas Pokemon could be global and you could have people collecting all over the world someday. If Pokemon does a good job of marketing to kids generation after generation, it's possible Pokemon could be like this unbelievable force, in the world, and we haven't seen anything yet.
Right.
That's possible.
And what's interesting to me is that in a lot of ways, and it is true with every hobby collectible, is like the future of it is tied to the actions of like a currently existing entity like Nintendo. Yeah. Or what I find interesting, right, is if someone is truly looking into this hobby as an investment, even sports cards as well, and you purely want an investment vehicle, why would you invest in Pokemon cards and not just in buying stock of the PSA company.
So the way that I think about it, and I don't think much is investable right now in the world. Just to be honest with you, because I think things are so unstable and there's so many unknowns, the social and political unrest all over the world, right? I just think there's so many unknowns. I don't invest in things I don't understand. It's, I'm a Warren Buffett investor and fan for people who know who he is. Like I invest in things that I understand that make sense to me and where I see long-term value. And something I said in another video, which I'll repeat here because it's important, I don't try to time things. Once I figure out something is a good investment, I buy it that day. Okay? Because with a good investment, you expect no matter where I bought it here, in 5 to 10 years, it's going to be higher. So even if I bought it the wrong day and it happened to move up or down 5%, it doesn't matter, because in the long term, I believe in the product. I believe in the idea. I believe in the company. I believe in whatever. Okay. The reason why I think it's so difficult to invest in anything right now is because it's such a confusing, I think we're at such a confusing point in predicting, for the points that you're saying, all these macroeconomic points. It's so hard to predict the future of Pokemon, the future of trading cards. Maybe people are just going to be done with cards soon and just like want to just do video games and just be online, and they don't care. Like physical objects become useless, and literally the market completely dies out, other than your 30-year-olds. We become 60, and by the time we're 60, our cards are worth nothing, right? So I just want people to understand that it's so difficult to predict any of those things from my perspective, that this is a flippers market. And flippers markets and day traders markets are markets when things are moving radically. And if you're very skilled at reading patterns, knowing what to do, there are people who make lots and lots of money day trading, and there are people who make lots and lots of money flipping. But the statistics show you that the vast majority of people lose money and can lose a lot of money, because it's so difficult to predict. And even the most experienced people who've been around the block many times, it's still hard to predict. I guarantee you there's not a single person in Pokemon who predicted 800% growth, for example. The vast majority of Pokemon channels at that time were saying we're going to see a retrace because of COVID. And that was a natural response, right? It was like, well, we're going to see a recession or a depression. And so who's going to spend money on Pokemon? And instead we saw the exact opposite, which just shows how difficult it is to predict, these sorts of things, and should be humbling for everyone. And, I was watching all of the best experts channels. Nobody predicted it would go up. Okay. And everyone was predicting it was going to go down. I had no idea because I was on the forums back then, and I was talking to people, and I was like one of the most bullish voices that I came across on Pokemon. I was like, Pokemon, like, I just can't believe the prices. Like, I think this is definitely going to go up. And so when COVID hit, a lot of the prices had already risen quite a bit before COVID hit. And that's something that people should know. Like Gym Challenge had already risen. Like a lot of the early Wizards of the Coast sets. This is also what scares me about speculation. I know I'm jumping all over the place, but it's important. And I'll get back to that other point. But what also scares me about speculation is that the most solid sets that I thought weren't overpriced moved before COVID and started moving before COVID. And I worry that movements in some areas, people then were like, oh, the other area should move. And whether that stays or not, there's a lot of stuff that I saw like that, like things that I thought were driven by genuine collector interest. And I thought those sets were always really undervalued. And then other things where I felt like it was more of like a market correction.
Or people who don't understand, right? Who see some things going up and they assume everything should. They don't realize that some hit lower pops are more popular, et cetera.
Exactly.
So I guess I want to try to bring us full circle because we were in the investing mindset for the last 10 minutes or so, and back to the collector mindset. And so I'll just be transparent about like what I'm doing. So I don't have a ton of Pokemon cards. Actually, personally have been mostly collecting the Star Wars CCG, which I mentioned before. But what I'm doing there is like basically I'm building up a collection of like one of every card that I want to own, which is like most of the cards, right? And once I have that, I think about like what scenarios would I be happy with in the future, right? So if I only had one of every card that I loved, I'd be really happy. If I also would love to have lots of duplicates of cards that I love and some sealed product and other stuff like that. But right now, all that stuff that I have, I'm selling. Because I think one scenario, the value crashes. So even the value of my collection of one of everything goes down, doesn't matter. I love that collection. I'll be happy with it. Other scenario, right, is the value goes up and up and up. I'll be sad I sold my duplicates, but happy that my main collection of one of everything is worth more. And in the first scenario, if things go down, I can always buy those duplicates later. So it's basically this exercise of thinking of like, what is like the minimum size collection that would make me like really, really happy to own this? And everything else, just because prices are high right now and I have zero ability to predict if they're going to go up or down the next day or the next year, might as well sell it now and just diversify between my collection and cash.
I think part of why it's such a great strategy for you is, and this isn't this isn't meant to offend you or put down your collection, but like, you don't have too many cards. You have a few cards that would be very difficult and very expensive to replace right now, but you don't have a lot of those like PSA 10 first edition cards that there are less than 40 of and things like that, or trophy cards, right, where there are only 100 in the world, or less than 100, 6 in the world, 12 in the world, 24 in the world. And so I think it's total, like this idea that you can definitely buy them back makes total sense for most cards. I hear, and I think it's such a good idea to talk to collectors, because we don't do enough of that, I think, on this channel, because I'm so focused on the finances, and that's really the benefit, right? We're trying to bring the finance to people and help people with that. But for the collectors out there, the cards that if you really need something in PSA 10 first edition, and there aren't that many of it, and it comes up on the market, you can make a case for buying it right now, even at what I would worry are very inflated prices, because one, nobody knows, and two, you want it so much that it's worth that price for you, and you're acknowledging that. You're not buying it to flip it later. You're not buying it because you want to make money necessarily. You're buying it because it's important for you in your life, to have that. It's going to bring you a lot of joy, and you can financially afford it because you're not looking to flip it to sell it to make a profit or pay for something. And so I would support, like, if I were your Pokemon, financial advisor, I would support, right? I would support that decision. It just makes sense as long as you can really afford it. What I suggested to someone who talked to me recently is I talked to them like, what about getting things instead of PSA 10, getting things in like 7 or 6, PSA 6 or 7 or PSA 8, or getting them ungraded, or getting it in unlimited, or getting it in Japanese, because then you have lower risk, because even if the card does go down 50%, when we first made our first video, I predicted like 15 to 30% retraces at some point. I predicted that the market would probably, continue to go up, or would likely potentially continue to go up until it reached like a stabilizing point, which I think we might be hitting now. Who knows? We are seeing more stabilization. And then once it stabilizes, then you're going to start to see a retrace when PSA sells. And we'll see how accurate I am. It would be interesting to see. But what I predicted was about a 15, 10, 5% on some cards, 10% on some cards, up to 15 to 20% on others. But now I worry that it could be larger because of all this intense flipping, because of all of that on certain cards, and because of the 800% that I'm seeing. So for collectors to understand that, and that you might see them come down. So to summarize it, as I continue to ramble here, I apologize, Raffi. You're so succinct, and I'm so rambly. We're a good combo. You keep me on track. Just to wrap that up, like, buy things because you really want them in this market. In my view, don't buy them for investments right now, because it's too risky in my mind as pure investment vehicles. But that is my style of investing. I'm a very cautious, low risk investor. I would much rather lose out on some potential profits, because the way that I invest, I feel like I'm very confident that I'm always going to make money overall in the long run. I'm not going to bust myself, and I'm not going to lose a huge fortune. And so my thinking of investing is I want to get 8 to 12% back a year in general, because I make enough, and because I have enough that will easily sustain me through my life and is all the money I need. I'm not looking I'm not looking for, get rich quick schemes and those sorts of things. I don't believe in them. And so that's my basic philosophy. But everyone is, I respect people who have different opinions, and I respect people who want to do the day trading and the flipping, and people have made plenty of money flipping in Pokemon, and there are people who flip who are like really smart and really good at it, so.
Yeah. And if I'm hearing you correctly, your advice also, going back to the original question, which is around selling, if I've been hearing you correctly, it's basically like, if you're more like me, right, a little bit more risk averse or have other priorities, might as well sell the stuff you don't need because prices are good. But anything that you'd be afraid you wouldn't be able to get back, or that you'd really regret losing if you were never able to get it again, then keep it.
Yes,
Does that resonate?
that is a good summary. That's the exact summary. Thank you,
Okay.
Raffi.
So I guess that is our conclusion for the viewers, at least if you're like us, right? That's kind of what I'm doing, and that's what I would do. But like you said, up to everybody else. And I think our long-term project is to try to figure out what is the demographic breakdown of collectors, or like how many are collectors versus investors versus flippers, how many of them are, high net worth versus low net worth, because that ultimately determines the long-term sustainability of the market.
Yeah, yeah, and we're all going to know a lot more, in 6 months from now and in a year from now than we know now. And yeah, we'll continue discussing it as it goes along and sharing with you guys our perspectives, and try our best to give you as accurate of information and as honest information as possible to help you sort of navigate this period, because this period's crazy, and it's very stressful, particularly if the amount of money you have in Pokemon is very can really have a big effect on your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, cool. Thank you, Jake. See ya.
Thank you, Raffi. Great to see you.